July 552 AD, near Taginae, Italy. Two armies stand less than 2 bowshots apart. One battle may decide 17 years of war, yet the Ostrogothic king refuses to begin. Totila rides alone into the space between the armies. His armor flashes with gold. Purple ornaments hang from his helmet. He spins his horse, throws a javelin into the air, catches it, and turns again. Thousands watch. Across the field, Narses does not move. Totila appears fearless, but the performance hides a problem. 2,000 Gothic horsemen have not arrived. The king is buying time. He believes every minute brings him closer to victory. He does not realize the elderly Roman commander is using those same minutes to prepare something else. Before darkness falls, the Gothic army will be running. Totila will leave the field with only a handful of men, and the kingdom that once ruled Italy will suffer a blow it cannot survive. The question is not why Totila delayed. The question is why Narses let him. The war had begun in 535 AD. Emperor Justinian wanted Italy returned to Roman rule. His general Belisarius crossed the sea, captured city after city, entered Rome, and forced the Gothic king Witiges to surrender Ravenna. It looked finished. It was not. The Goths chose new leaders. Then they found Totila. He rebuilt their army, recovered most of Italy, and captured Rome more than once. Imperial troops went unpaid. Reinforcements arrived too slowly. Belisarius returned, but without enough men or money to destroy the Gothic resistance. By 552, Justinian had spent 17 years trying to finish a war that kept rebuilding itself. Now he chose Narses. To Gothic warriors, the choice must have looked strange. Narses was not a young cavalry commander. He was a palace eunuch, an administrator, a diplomat, a man already in his 70s, but he was not new to war. 14 years earlier, he had entered Italy with thousands of reinforcements. He had taken part in major operations and commanded soldiers of his own. That mission ended in rivalry and divided authority. This time, there would be no rival command. Justinian gave Narses a large army, great sums of money, and the authority to use both. Romans marched beside Lombards, Heruls, Huns, Gepids, Armenians, and other allied troops. They did not share one language or one reason for fighting. Narses had to turn them into one army before Totila could break them apart. And first, he had to reach Italy. The northern approaches were blocked. Gothic forces guarded the usual roads. Fortifications, flooded ground, and hostile powers made a direct march dangerous. So Narses moved along the Adriatic coast. Ships followed the army near the shoreline. At river mouths, boats and temporary crossings helped the troops continue north. The route was slow, awkward, and difficult for a force this large, but it worked. Narses reached Ravenna. Then he turned south. Near Rimini, the Goths damaged a bridge and prepared to stop him. Their commander was killed during a failed attack. The garrison withdrew behind the walls. Narses did not stop to besiege the city. That decision mattered. Every fortress could consume days. Every delay gave Totila time to gather more men. Narses repaired the crossing, passed Rimini, and abandoned the blocked main road. He was not trying to conquer Italy one wall at a time. He wanted the Gothic field army. Totila understood the danger. He moved north to meet him. Most of Tea's reinforcements joined the king. But 2,000 horsemen were still behind. Then both armies reached the Apennines near a village called Taginae. Narses sent Totila a choice: surrender or name the day of battle. Totila answered, 8 days from now. Narses did not believe him. He ordered the Romans to prepare for battle the next morning. At dawn, Totila appeared with the force already at hand. The lie had failed, but the battle had already begun somewhere else. Beside the Roman position stood a small hill. The hill itself was not impressive. The path beside it was. It offered the only practical route around that side of the Roman camp. If the Goths seized it, they could threaten Narses from the rear. Narses moved first. During the night, he sent 50 infantrymen to hold the path. At daylight, Totila saw them. Gothic cavalry charged. The 50 Romans packed themselves shoulder to shoulder. Shields formed a barrier. Spears projected through the gaps. The ground was rough. The path was narrow. The horses could not pass around them. The Romans hammered their shields together. The noise frightened the animals. The first attack lost its shape and pulled back. Totila sent them again. They failed again. He replaced them with fresh cavalry. The 50 still held. 2 soldiers, Paulus and Ancillus, stepped out in front. They used bows until their arrows were gone. Then they fought with shields and swords. Procopius says Paulus's blade bent from striking spear shafts, so he began seizing the Gothic spears with both hands and dragging them away. Eventually, Totila stopped trying. The action was small compared with the battle to come. Its effect was not. Narses had closed the route around his flank. Totila would now have to attack from the front, exactly where Narses wanted him. The Romans formed first. Narses took position on the left beside the hill. His best troops stood around him. Roman commanders held the right. Across both wings stood about 8,000 unmounted archers. In the center, Narses placed Lombards, Herules, and other allied troops. Many had arrived on horseback. He ordered them to dismount. Procopius gives a blunt reason. If some of them lost their nerve, they would not be able to flee as quickly. On the extreme left, angled away from the main line, waited 1,500 cavalry. 500 were a rescue force. If any Roman unit broke, they would move to support it. The remaining 1,000 had another task. Once the Gothic infantry entered the battle, they were to ride behind it. Narses was preparing for more than one possible crisis. Totila built a simpler line, cavalry in front, infantry behind. Then neither army moved. A Gothic warrior named Coccus rode forward. He had once served the Romans before deserting to Totila. Now he challenged anyone in Narses's army to single combat. An Armenian spearman named Anzalas accepted. Coccus charged first. At the last moment, Anzalas turned aside, passed onto the Goth's exposed flank, and struck him with his spear. Coccus fell. A shout rolled across the Roman line. Still, Totila did not attack. He was waiting for the missing 2,000, so the king rode forward in gold. Totila's display lasted through the early part of the day. He wheeled his horse in circles, changed direction, leaned from side to side, tossed his weapon upward, and caught it again. It was theatre with a military purpose. Then Totila asked to negotiate. Narses refused. The king had rejected talks when there was time to talk. Now both armies were ready, and every new message only consumed more of the morning. Then the riders Totila had been waiting for reached the Gothic camp. 2,000 fresh horsemen. The delay had worked. Totila ordered his army back to eat. He removed the gold and purple equipment. In its place, he put on the armor of an ordinary soldier. He no longer wanted to be seen. He wanted to return suddenly, catch the Romans resting, and hit them before they could reform. But the Roman line never dissolved. Narses had ordered every man to remain armed. No one could remove his cuirass. No cavalryman could take the bridle from his horse. They ate a small meal while standing in formation and watching the Gothic camp. Then Narses changed the battlefield. The 4,000 archers on the left moved forward. The 4,000 on the right did the same. The Roman wings bent toward the enemy. Not enough to close the space, enough to fire into it. Totila returned and saw an army still waiting for him. He attacked anyway. The Gothic cavalry formed into one great body across the front. Behind them stood the infantry, ready to receive the riders if they withdrew, and then continue the attack. Totila issued one final order. The entire Gothic army would use spears. No bows, no supporting missile attack. He was betting everything on shock. That choice was not madness. Gothic cavalry had broken Roman formations before. A concentrated charge could cross the ground quickly, smash the center, and turn a mixed army into a frightened crowd. But Narses had removed the flank route. He had kept his troops ready, and he had pushed 8,000 archers forward on both sides of the ground the cavalry had to cross. The Gothic riders lowered their spears. Then they came forward. At first, nothing stopped them. Then arrows began falling from the left. A moment later, they came from the right. The riders were not charging toward one wall of archers. They were moving deeper between two of them. The Roman wings kept turning inward. Horses fell, gaps opened, riders pressed around them. The formation lost width, then order, but the charge did not vanish. The surviving Goths kept moving. They crossed the killing ground and finally reached the Roman center. Now Narses needed the part of his plan no formation could guarantee. His men had to hold. The impact did not destroy the Roman line. Lombards, Herules, and Roman troops met the remaining charge at close range. The fighting continued for hours. The Goths had suffered before contact, but they were not finished. They pushed against the center while Roman archers and troops on the wings continued to pressure them. Narses's coalition did not split. No allied contingent fled. No Roman wing collapsed. Toward evening, the Gothic cavalry began to give ground. At first, it was a withdrawal. Then the riders reached their own infantry. That second line should have opened lanes and received them. It did neither. The cavalry arrived too fast and in too much disorder. The infantry saw riders coming backward, Romans following behind, and no clear command holding the line together. Men trying to escape struck men still waiting to fight. The infantry broke. Now the retreat became a rout. Roman troops pushed forward across the field. The Gothic army scattered as darkness approached. Procopius reports 6,000 Gothic dead. Ancient figures are never exact, but the scale of the defeat was clear. Totila's army still had survivors. Its king was no longer leading them. Procopius records two versions of Totila's death. In the first, the king escaped into the night with no more than 5 companions. Roman pursuers followed without knowing who he was. A Gepid named Aspad drew close from behind. One of Totila's followers shouted that he was about to strike his own master. That warning revealed the identity of the fleeing soldier. Aspad drove his spear forward. Totila's companions carried the wounded king away. They reached a place called Caprae, tried to treat him, and buried him there after he died. The second version is different. It says an arrow struck Totila during the battle. Because he had changed into ordinary armor, the archer did not know he had hit the king. Totila withdrew with a few men, reached Caprae, and died from the wound. The details cannot be settled. The ending can. That morning, Totila had ridden between two armies covered in gold, making sure every soldier could see him. That night, he left the field dressed as an ordinary man, and the Romans did not yet know he was dead. Only later did they learn where he had been buried. Taginae did not destroy every Gothic soldier. The survivors chose Teia as king. He gathered the remaining forces and continued the war. Narses moved south. Rome returned to imperial control. Later in 552 or early in 553, the final main Gothic army fought near Mons Lactarius, close to Mount Vesuvius. Teia was killed. The remaining warriors eventually accepted terms. Some fortresses resisted longer, but the Ostrogothic kingdom could no longer recover. Taginae had broken the army that protected it. Mons Lactarius finished what remained. And the most important part of Narsis's victory had happened before the first great charge. He had bypassed the blocked road. He had refused to waste time at Rimini. He had anticipated Totila's false date. He had taken the hill first. He had kept his army armed during the meal, and he had allowed Totila to believe the morning belonged to him. The Gothic king received his missing horsemen. Narses received the battlefield. Totila had spent hours buying time. He discovered too late that he had been buying it for his enemy. Which final stand should come next? Teia at Mons Lactarius, or another battle where one decision destroyed an army? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Wars in History for more battles reconstructed from the choices that decided them.